Hello creeps! Andy here, and today I wanted to talk about the only books that I have given a 5-star rating for. So these are, I guess, in my opinion, the best books ever written, and I selected a whole variety of different categories. I have horror, books that are like in the literary canon, science fiction, fiction, and nonfiction books. So I have a little bit of everything. Hopefully you can find something in here that interests you. These are books that I would not change one word. I think they're absolutely perfect, brilliant, and they've, obviously changed my life in some way. That might sound dramatic, but you guys know if you love books that books change you, They make you think a different way, they make you feel a different way, and these books are that to me. There's a few of them, so this video might be long, I will warn you, because they're my favorite books, so I'm obviously gonna geek out about them for a little while, but hopefully you'll stay tuned for them. Please let me know what your absolute 5-star best books, brilliant books ever written are down below, and let's just get started. I am pretty excited for this. So I guess we'll start with horror and then we'll just kind of work our way down since that's just usually what I talk about. Okay, first let's start with horror, my favorite horror books of all time. The first one that I want to start with is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. Now I know that this is a popular book and a popular movie and a lot of people love this book, and there is good reason for it. It's about a man named Lewis Creed and his family. They move to a new town and they come to find out through ways of their neighbor that there's a pet cemetery that has, it's like Indian burial ground that has gone bad, and if you bury something in it, it comes back to life, but it's kind of just the shell that's living and there's something much darker dwelling inside. But to me, this book has helped me through a very hard time. At its core, it's a book about grief. It really is how far you would go to get back the ones that you love. This book is so poetically written. I would argue it's one of Stephen King's more poetically written books, and there's enough creepy, weird, gross stuff that it still has that horror element to it. It's very original. To me, this book is much more than just a horror book, and if you read this book after going through a loss of someone, I feel like you'll read it in a different way than you've read it in the past. And I just adore that book. Wouldn't change a word. The next one is going to be controversial, and I already see people clicking off this video, but just hear me out. It's American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. You cannot convince me that this is not one of the best books ever written. I know that a lot of people hate it. I know that it can be very wordy at times, very descriptive of Patrick Bateman's wardrobe and the things that he owns, but I promise you, every word in here is meant to be in here. It's perfect, it has meaning. It's one of those books where you do have to dig a little bit deeper, and I think that there are people who read this kind of on the surface and don't dig a little bit, and then they come up disappointed at the end, and that's totally fair. And if that's not the type of book that you enjoy, you're not gonna like this book. But if you pay attention to this, just the way that it begins with a quote from Dante's Inferno and the way that it ends really tells you about where this character is stuck and how he feels about life. I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. It's one of the best books ever written. I have a movieverse book on this. I'll leave it down below. Oh, and I also have a video where I watched all the movies talked about in here too, so I'll leave that video down below as well. Anyways, fantastic, brilliant, amazing, wouldn't change a word. Bret Easton Ellis is just a genius. So yeah, absolutely adore that guy. I don't think I need to give you a synopsis, right? Like, it's about Patrick Bateman, who's, depending on the way that you see it, either a deranged serial killer or somebody who's very mentally unwell. The next horror book that I think is absolutely perfect is Tender and Is the Flesh. This is by Augustina Bastrika, and this again is another controversial horror book. And by the way, these books, I know that I have kind of a weird taste in books. I know that all these books won't be for everybody, but that's my style. So it's okay that if you hate some or all of these books, that's totally fine. Art is subjective, it's all good. But this book blew me away. It's about this illness that comes and infects our livestock, so we're unable to eat meat, or so the government says, because there's some weird things in here as well. So they end up creating humans for consumption. And it does go into quite a bit of detail of the meat packaging factory and things like that. And it's written in such almost like a mundane way. This guy's like going to job and he's like, here's the meat factory I work at, and you're just like, how are you living like this? It's disgusting. I think it's a comment on government overstepping. I think it's a comment on if we can trust the people in charge. I think it's a comment on the way that society just follows everyone else and how quickly things can change and how we can accept disturbing things that happen. And I think that this book, again, is one of those books where you have to dig a little deeper. I like books like that. I like books where I can find my own meaning. It's a little bit subjective. I mean, the ending, it's not open-ended. I feel like a book like American Psycho, where you could argue either way that Patrick Bateman either did or didn't commit the murders. This one, you know, it's pretty obvious what happens, but I think that there is stuff to dig a little deeper on throughout the story, and you can come up with your own conclusions. I've even heard people go as far as to say that to them this book is about eating meat and how you shouldn't eat meat. And like, that's fine. That's what you got from it, and that's cool. That is definitely not what I got from it, but I think it's a comment on more about like how we treat each other versus like animals, but I think it's brilliant. The next one that I don't have is Blackmouth by Ronald Malfi. I just read this book this year, and oh my gosh, one of the best horror books ever written, hands down. It's about a man who's suffering from alcohol addiction, so it does get pretty deep into, you know, deeper topics. It's not just a baseline horror book. But again, I like books like that that are a little bit more than just blood and guts. Not that blood and guts is bad, but to me this book was honestly brilliant. It was disturbing and weird and dark. It was a book I've never read before. I've never read anything like it. The back is pretty vague. It just says that a man meets up with his childhood friends to kind of uncover what happened in their past. And that's kind of all it says. So I don't want to give too much away for this one, but truly would not change a word. It's so great. I'm telling you, I don't think that you'll be disappointed if you pick this one up. It really is a fantastic book. It's not one that you have to like dig super deep and uncover the meaning. It's just like a fun ride with a little bit heavier of topics. So those are the horror books. Let's go to the books that are more literary, like in the literary canon. Next. The next one I have here, this is called The Stranger by Albert Camus, I think is how you pronounce it. And this was actually the winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. Man, this book, it just destroys me. It's about a man who commits a murder accidentally, question mark, and it's separated in two parts, kind of prior to the murder and post the murder. The book starts and ends with the effects of a murder, or effects of death. And no matter like where this guy is, he's at home, he's in jail, he's kind of doing the same thing. You just follow his journey of being complacent with everything. Like, he just doesn't care about anything. He's one of the most interesting narrators of a book I have ever read. He gets asked to move to Paris by his boss. He's like, nah, I don't care. He gets asked by his girlfriend if he wants to get married. He's like, nah, if you want to, I don't really care. He gets asked if he is sad about the murders. He's like, I'm more just annoyed. Like, he just doesn't care about anything. I don't know if nihilistic is the right word for it. I guess it is, because at the end of the book, he's just like, life has no meaning. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I die now or in 70 years. We're all gonna die. It doesn't matter. And so if you want a little bit of an existential crisis, I would suggest reading this. The thing I love so much about this book is that it's written in, again, such a mundane way that it lacks emotion, and it's almost like a news article. It's like, I went here, I did this, I came home, I ate, kind of reporting. And at first you're reading it and you're like, what? This is such a weird way to write a book, you know? And then you get to the part where he's really talking about life, where you analyze really how he feels about everything, and you're like, oh wait, this is just him. The way that the story is written really reflects what this character feels, and it's just such an interesting book, again, to like really sit down and analyze everything that happens in the book. It is so interesting. And although it may seem like the beginning doesn't matter to the end, it all kind of comes back around. It is an interesting book. One last thing I'll say about this is that the sun and the beach, or the sea, are kind of characters in themselves, and they are the only thing that emotion is kind of surrounded by, whether that's happiness or anger, and everything else lacks a lot of emotion. But there's a paragraph in here that just destroys me every time I read it. Hopefully, I don't think I'm ruining anything, because I told you what he feels like, but it says, but everybody knows life isn't worth living. Deep down, I know perfectly well that it doesn't matter whether you die at 30 or at 70, since in either case, other men and women will naturally go on living for thousands of years. Whether it's now or in 20 years from now, I would still be the one dying. At that point, what would disturb my train of thought was the terrifying leap I would feel my heart take at the idea of having 20 more years of life ahead of me. just so freaking nihilistic. We're all going to die. It's obvious that when and where doesn't matter. And the last paragraph of the book is really disturbing. I don't want to give too much away or talk too much about one book, but that book blows me away every time I read it. And it's gonna not be for everybody, but it's a really interesting read if you want something like that. The next one I have here is 1984 by George Orwell. Love the absolute crap out of this book. I'm pretty sure most of you have read it by now, but it's one of those books in the literary canon that just deserves to be there. It's about Big Brother kind of overstepping their boundaries and being fixed into every part of human existence, and you get no, personal thought or time for yourself, and everybody just has to act the way that the government is telling them to act. It's definitely a dystopian novel, one of the best ever written. I don't think I need to go into too much detail because I'm pretty sure most people have read that by now. And the next one that's in the literary canon, I can't find my Dante's, the portable Dante, so I'll just have to use this one for now. That means I don't have any direct quotes for you, but Dante's Inferno is one of the best books ever written, and I gotta be honest, it's it's about Dante being led through the rings of hell by Virgil, and as they progress down into these rings of hell, the punishment gets more and more intense, and he's talking to men that are living these eternal punishments for things that they did. And it's not like, oh, I murdered everybody. It's like, oh, I stole a piece of bread, and now I'm burning in sulfur for eternity. Like, it's dark. Whoever's brain, well, I know whose brain, Dante, but the ability to create this type of torture page and page and page over and over again, it's just mind-boggling to me that this is not talked about more, especially in the horror sense. It is very wordy with names, and so I do suggest getting something like the portable Dante so that you can have reference to all of those names, and it can feel maybe a little bit like you're doing research while you're reading it, but to me that was really entertaining, and I enjoy every time I read this. I always read this one quote about how a man ended up eating his children. It's just so freaking disturbing, and it's one of the best books ever written, and I love it very much. It's part of Dante's Divine Comedy. If you have that, then you have Dante's Inferno. But those are my literary books. Next up, let's move over to science fiction. I only have two here, and the first one, surprise, surprise, is The Martian by Andy Weir. I love this book. I adore this book. This book honestly did change my life. It changed the way that I think about waking up each day. It changed the way that I think about overcoming things. Like, the character in the story is just so absolutely brave and strong, and everything that I admire and wish I were. And so it's about a man named Mark Watney who gets stuck on Mars. He has to try to figure out how to survive until people can come and pick him up. It's a survival story at its heart, just like how far would you go to survive. It's also written in a way where it tries to explain the scientific things that are taking place, and obviously I'm no scientist, but I felt like I didn't get it, I didn't understand it, but I got it enough to be able to kind of figure out what he was doing. I loved every second of this book, and it's one of my favorite books. And the next one I read this year, this is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and holy crap, this is just a good time. Like, if you just want a fun adventure, thriller, science fiction, love story all in one, this book is it. This is one of those two where the back's kind of vague. There's a man, and I think he's a college professor, and he has a wife and a kid, but he wonders what would have happened had he not gotten married and had kids and focused on his career. And he ends up being napped. He ends up being taken from his family and does everything he can to try to get back to them. So it's a little bit of everything. It doesn't sound sci-fi, but I promise it's very sci-fi, very original, very unique, and just a blast. I could not put this book down. It was so fun. Next, let's do books that are just in the fiction category. The first, Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuk. I just did a whole video on this, so I'll leave that link down below if you want 20 minutes of me just talking about how much I love this book. But this book is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. I know that it came out almost 30 years ago, which is absolutely insane. And the movie is still great too, But yeah, this book is absolutely brilliant. The way that it's written, the way that the two halves kind of mirror each other. It's about a man who meets a man named Tyler Durden. He lives like a pretty normal life up to that point, and then they create Fight Club, which turns into Project Mayhem, which turns into something bigger than he ever expected. There's so much to say about this, and I still have a few more books to get through, so watch that video if you're interested on why this is such a great book. But it's one of those, again, where like the style of writing is written in a way that mirrors or is a metaphor for what happens in the plot. It's brilliant. It really is brilliant. I love it. Chuck Palahniuk's a genius. Fantastic, amazing, great book. Would not change a word. Talking about amazing books, my god, one of my favorite books ever written. This is The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. I adore the crap out of this book. I often lump this in the category of horror just because so many dark, gross, weird things happen in this book that there is absolutely some horror in here. It's just in the fiction section, but it is disturbing. They recently made a movie about this a year or two ago. I made a movie verse book on that. I will leave that linked down below, but this book is incredible. It's about, I think it's 2 towns in here, in this one, where people honestly just do horrible things to each other. They lie, they cheat, they steal, they murder. It's awful, disgusting. It talks about drug addiction and abuse and all sorts of stuff that you do not want to read is in here. It's one of those books where at the end you feel like you need a shower. You feel dirty, you feel gross. But it is so brilliantly written, the way that everything kind of wraps back around. It's one of those books where you don't get bored. Not one page of this is boring. Every single chapter is some other disturbing thing by some other disturbing person, and then somehow it wraps up with a chapter 3 or 4 chapters back, and you're just like, how did you write this? It's honestly brilliant. It's very disturbing, but amazing. The next 2 are from, surprise, surprise, Kurt Vonnegut, because he's one of my favorite writers of all time. Slaughterhouse-Five, talk about this book all the time. One of the best books ever written, in my opinion. It's kind of an anti-war book that doesn't really talk about war. It's strange. Okay, I'm just gonna say it. It's strange. His writing is very strange. Like, he uses like aliens to talk about war. You know what I mean? Like, it's weird. It's a weird book, but I love it. I love every page of it. What this book did for me and like how it changed my life was it made me realize that there are no rules in writing. You know, I mean, you need to know the rules to be able to bend them and kind of distort reality the way that Kurt Vonnegut does. But this made me think and approach writing in a way different way than I ever had before. He is just one of my heroes. I think he's an absolute genius. Highly recommend this book. Now this is, I would argue, his most popular book, and I don't hear that many people talking about this one. This is Mother Night, and I would argue this is one of the best books ever written. And it's like tied, I think, with Slaughterhouse-Five. It's an amazing book. It's about a man who, he was born in America, but he moved to Germany, and during World War II, he became like a propagandist for Nazi Germany, for the Nazis. And so you're just like, oh, this guy's this guy's a scumbag, you know? He has said things that were absolutely atrocious and awful, and you hear it through other characters. The way that this book is written is so freaking interesting. But then you come to find out that through his propaganda, he was giving codes to the US. So you're like, okay, so was he on the side of the Nazis or on the side of the US? You don't really know. And he doesn't ever really tell you. And it is like a very weird distortion of morality, because you're like, on one hand, great, you were giving these codes to the US, but on the other hand, you still said and did awful things and people still took your word. You know what I mean? So it's such an interesting book. Let me just give you this one quote back here. It says that Vonnegut turns black and white into a chilling shade of gray with a verdict that will haunt us all. This book kind of broke me. Like, the ending, yeah, it got to me. I love this book. I don't know what to tell you other than I love it. It's honestly a trip reading his work, and I absolutely adore and love him so much. Now let's go to nonfiction books, and these again are disturbing books. This one is called Haunted by G.L. Davies, and this is actually just an author. I follow him online, and he asked me if he could send me his book, and I was like, yeah, sure, because, you know, I read books from smaller authors, independent authors, and he sent me this, and I was blown away. It's about his story living in a haunted house, and so he published that story, and then another couple reached out to him and they were like, I know what haunted house that is because we experienced that too. And so he wrote a second part to the book about their experience in the same house, and it is absolutely terrifying. It is the only I can think of haunted house book where I was like, how am I gonna sleep? This book is so creepy and fun, and I just loved every page of it. So yeah, and you know, it wasn't a book that I knew about before. I was lucky enough that he sent me a copy, and I just adore it. I love this book so much. And the other one that I would say is just 5 stars amazing is this one. This is The Exorcism of Annelise Michel by Felicitas D. Goodman. And this is, you know, the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose? This is a true story behind that. Not that the movie was based specifically on this book, but on this story of this girl. And so Felicitas D. Goodman, she went to Germany. This took place in Germany, right? Yeah. She went to Germany, she got the court documents, she talked with the family, she interviewed the priest, and just compiled a crazy amount of evidence surrounding this exorcism and the horrible, you know, unfortunate demise of Annelise Michel, who ended up passing away during one of these exorcisms. This book is so disturbing. I just recently put it on my bookshelf. It was in my closet for a very long time. I have 2 whole like hour-long videos discussing the contents in here. So I'll leave those videos linked down below in case you want to, you know, get a little bit of information from what actually happened here. But this is one of those books where it's just like, I'm so thankful that it was written. You know, I'm glad that her story was told. Her parents and priest ended up being arrested for her murder, and the court cases are in here, and everything is laid out, and I'm just glad that her story can be told. It's also, you know, questionable what even happened. Like, obviously I don't know that I believe in like possession, but I don't know if it was that or like a mental health thing or a physical thing. It's just a wild ride. And also to read what that poor girl went through for years. I mean, she was sick from a young age into her, when she passed away in her early mid-20s. So super sad story, but I think worth keeping her story alive and knowing what she had to suffer through. Those are my 5-star book reviews. Very curious what your 5-star reads are. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye guys!